Now these are the areas the Israelites received as an inheritance in the land of Canaan, which Eleazar the priest, that was Aaron's son, Joshua son of Nun, and the heads of the tribal clans of Israel allotted to them. Their inheritances were assigned by lot to the 9.5 tribes, as the Lord had commanded through Moses. Moses had granted the 2.5 tribes their inheritance east of the Jordan, but had not granted the Levites an inheritance among the rest, for the sons of Joseph had become 2 tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim. The Levites received no share of the land, but only towns to live in. We're going to read about that in chapter 21. With pasture lands for their flocks and herds. So the Israelites divided the land, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Now the men of Judah approached Joshua at Gilgal. And Caleb, son of Jephunneh, remember him? He was the other faithful spy back in the days of the Numbers. And Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, said to him, "You know the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, at Kadesh Barnea, about you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land." Now, Joshua went with them. We don't get Joshua's age here at that time, though. We know that Caleb was 40. We don't know what Joshua would have been, I'm sure, at least 40. He probably was older than Caleb because he was in the charge, so he probably was higher up in the totem pole because he was older. So he's probably older than Caleb. Not as old as Moses, but older than Caleb. So Moses would have been 80 at the time, and Caleb was 40. So Joshua somewhere sits in between them, 50, 60, I'm not really sure. We get Caleb's age, and we don't get Joshua's. It'd be helpful. It would be helpful, but we don't get that. So I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land. And I brought him back a report according to my convictions. But my brothers, who went up with me, made the hearts of the people melt with fear. I, however, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. So on that day Moses swore to me, "The land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance, and that of your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly." Now then, just as the Lord had promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years, since the time he said this to Moses, while Israel moved about in the desert. So now we know that this is taking place 5 years after Moses' death. Moses died in the 40th year after the wilderness wanderings. And this is now 5 years after that. So the conquest of the land took about 5 years. Well, or I should say, what we read about in Joshua, the conquest as it's recorded in Joshua took about 5 years. So here I am today, 85 years old. I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then. Now give me this hill country the Lord promised me that day. You yourself heard then that the Anakites were there, and their cities were large and fortified. But with the Lord helping me, I will drive them out just as he said. Then Joshua blessed Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and gave him Hebron as his inheritance. So Hebron has belonged to Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, ever since, because he followed the Lord, the God of Israel, wholeheartedly. Hebron used to be called Kiriath Arba, after Arba, who was the greatest man among the Anakites. Then the land had rest from war. This is a very short video. So we're going to go ahead and read some town names, some allotments. We got several chapters of this to go through. We're going to get the process started here. This is not exciting reading for us today. We'll be honest. Okay? I'm not going to try to pretend that this is something that I'm excited about doing, or that my throat, my tongue, and my vocal cords are excited about doing, or that most people, or anybody hearing me, is going to be excited about hearing. Okay? I'll admit, and I think we need to be honest about this. Okay, this does not carry the same level of interest to us today as maybe the rest of Joshua does, about the actual battles. That's more exciting reading. Or other things. Okay, it's like, this is not. But, just like the Exodus, okay, remember the Exodus, in the book of Exodus, the Exodus itself happens in the first 15 chapters of Exodus. Exodus has 40 chapters. So there are 25 chapters in Exodus that have to do something other than the Exodus itself. Okay? Most of that is very dry reading about laws, the first batch of laws they received, or instructions to build the tabernacle and the various things that go along with it, which don't have a lot of meaning to us today, because we don't have to build the tabernacle today. We can get some insight into the nature of the tabernacle that God was teaching the people at the time through the design and shape of the tabernacle. But we don't have the tabernacle in front of us. We don't know exactly what it looked like, even if we have the instructions, or some of the instructions. The instructions we have are not sufficient to be able to build one completely true to form, because we don't see it. You know, Moses had the blueprint or something that God showed him, a pattern, that we don't have. So we don't know exactly what it looked like, even if we have written instructions for some of its dimensions and stuff. And it's hard to read through. Okay, this is similar, but that would have been more important to Moses than the stuff of the Exodus itself. Okay, recording the Exodus itself would have just been a lead up to the important stuff, which is what happens after that. Just like Leviticus, if Moses himself could tell you what he thought was the most important thing he left behind, I'm sure he would tell you in the writing that he left behind. I believe he'd probably tell you was the book of Leviticus. The instructions for the offerings and the feast days and the rituals and the purity laws and things like that, I think was more important to Moses than Genesis 1, for example, or anything in Genesis, for that matter. Or Exodus, the beginning of Exodus at least. And this is true, I think, also in Joshua. Like, this stuff here was more important to them. It's not really important to us today, okay? This forever, the term of giving the land to the people forever, in English carries with it a different connotation than it should, because it doesn't mean it's theirs literally for all time. It meant as long as the covenant endures. And the covenant no longer endures. So this material today is no longer even in force or applicable. And we don't even know who the tribes of Israel are today, so we wouldn't be able to enforce it even if we wanted to, or if we thought we had the authority to. But this mattered to these people. Okay, this is the basis of their entire tribal inheritance. And it will be throughout their history. So this is more important to them. I'm very confident in saying this is more important to them than the narrative of the conquest they read about in the beginning of Joshua. We get uptight about the conquest. We want to say it didn't happen, or we want to say whatever. But what really mattered to Joshua and the people who wrote this down would have been this stuff here. It doesn't mean very much to us today. But if we're going to understand this material the way these people did, we need to realize how important this was to them. Oh boy. The allotment for the tribe of Judah, clan by clan, extended down to the territory of Edom, to the desert of Zin in the extreme south. The southern boundary started from the bay at the southern end of the Salt Sea at the Dead Sea, crossed south of the Scorpion Pass, continued on to Zin, and went over to the south of Kadesh Barnea. Then it ran past Hezron up to Adar and curved around to Karka. It then passed along the Asmon and joined the Wadi of Egypt, ending at the sea. The Wadi of Egypt is not, by the way, the Nile. A wadi is a river that's only filled with water during the rainy season and dries up during the non-rainy season. And it's not referring. So it's kind of, you could call it the river of Egypt, because it's a river. It's not filled with water year round. But it is not the Nile. It's some other. We think of the Nile as being the main river in Egypt, and it is. But this is not the Nile. This is another thing. Ending at the sea. It's the Mediterranean Sea. This is their southern boundary. The eastern boundary is the Salt Sea, as far as the mouth of the Jordan. The northern boundary started from the Bay of the Sea at the mouth of the Jordan, went up to Beth Hoglah, and continued north of Beth Arabah to the stone of Bohan, son of Reuben. I don't know what that is. I mean, you could probably find. I mean, you can find. I mean, this Bible has a map in it that outlines roughly where the boundaries were. Okay, right there it is. I'm sure your Bible does too. You can find study Bibles that have more detailed maps. You could go online and find maps that can outline the boundaries here Pretty precisely. I'm not going to do that. Okay, it's like I believe. I have a map here. I have a map in my study Bible. I can get maps online. You can too. Okay, it's like I'm not going to provide the maps for you here. I'll provide commentary and talking, but I'm going to trust you know how to. If you're anybody who is capable of going online and watching this video, listening to it, is also capable of going online and looking for a map of the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay, so I'm going to leave you to do that. That being said, I don't know how many of these landmarks we can be completely certain about. Like, what is the stone of Bilhan, son of Reuben? Okay, I'd be completely lying if I told you I know what that is. Maybe we know what that is. Maybe there is a stone out there somewhere that we can identify as that stone. I'm going to be skeptical about that. I don't know how many of these landmarks we can be precise about. But we can be reasonably confident of quite a few of these. We know where the Salt Sea is. We know where the Mediterranean Sea is. We know where the Jordan River is, and many other features and landscapes. I don't know about some of these particular landmarks. I want to be skeptical if we can identify what the stone of Bilhan is. 3,500 years later, 3,400 years later, 3,500, whatever. I'm going to be skeptical of that, okay? But we can get a general idea of where these tribal allotments were. The boundary then went up to Debir from the valley of Achor and turned north to Gilgal, which faces the pass of Adumim south of the gorge. It continued along the waters of En Shemesh and came out at En Rogel. Then it ran up the valley of Ben Hinnom. That's an important name. Keep that in mind. The valley of Ben Hinnom is literally going to someday be hell. Okay? The concept that we have of hell comes from this area, this valley, the valley of Ben Hinnom. We'll talk about that as we go through. That's our first reference to the valley that would be hell, the valley that inspired the imagery of hell. So it ran up the valley of Ben Hinnom, or ran up hell, along the southern slope of the Jebusite city, that is Jerusalem. They did not conquer Jerusalem at this time. They won't get Jerusalem until David takes it, 400 plus years from now. From the hilltop, where am I? I skipped the verse. From there, it climbed to the top of the hill west of the Hinnom Valley, at the northern end of the valley of Rephaim. From the hilltop, the boundary headed toward the spring of the waters of Naphtali, came out at the towns of Mount Ephron, and went down toward Bela, that is, Kiriath Jearim. Then it curved westward from Bela to Mount Seir, ran along the northern slope of Mount Jearim, that is, Kesalon, continued down to Beth Shemesh, and crossed to Timnah. It went to the northern slope of Ekron, turned toward Shikkeron, passed along to Mount Bela, and reached Jabneel. The boundary ended at the sea. Of course, that would be the Mediterranean Sea. Anytime you hear the word sea in the Old Testament, it's the Mediterranean Sea. And anytime you just hear the word river in the Old Testament, that's the Euphrates River. The western boundary is the coastline of the sea, the Great Sea, the Mediterranean, of course. These are the boundaries around the people of Judah. The boundaries around the people of Judah by their clans. And according to the Lord's command to him, Joshua gave to Caleb, son of Jephunneh, a portion in Judah, Kiriath Arba, that is, Hebron. This will actually be David's first capital when he becomes king of Judah. Arba was the forefather of Anak. From Hebron, Caleb drove out the 3 Anakites, Shishai, Ahiman, and Talmai, descendants of Anak. From there, he marched against the people living in Debir, formerly called Kiriath Sefer. And Caleb said, I will give my daughter, Aksah, in marriage to the man who attacks and captures Kiriath Sefer. So Caleb is 85 years old and has an unmarried daughter. I don't know how old this lady would be. I don't know. He could have had her, I guess, at age 60. She could be 20, maybe. He could have had her, I guess, at age 65 or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, he has at least one unmarried daughter still to marry off. So Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's brother, took it. So Caleb gave his daughter Aksah to him in marriage. Othniel will be the first judge of Israel. Probably the same guy. So we're going to read about Othniel again in the days of Judges, because he's going to be the first judge of Israel. One day, when she, the daughter, Aksah, came to Othniel, she urged him to ask her father for a field. There's a note here. What's the note say? Or Othniel, he or her, one way or another. When she got off her donkey, so either she urged him or he urged her, we don't really know, but at any rate, they wanted a field. When she got off her donkey, Caleb asked her, "What can I do for you?" She replied, "Do me a special favor. Since you have given me land in the Negev, give me also springs of water." So Caleb gave her the upper and lower springs. This is the inheritance of the tribe of Judah, clan by clan. The southernmost towns of the tribe of Judah in the Negev toward the boundary of Edom were Kabzeel, Eder, Jagur, Kena, Didamah, Adadah, Kadesh, Hazor, Ithnan, Ziph, Telem, Baaloth, Hazor Hadattah, Kiriath Hezron, that is Hazor, Elam, Shema, Moladah, Hazor Gada, Heshmon, Beth Pelet, Hazor Shual, Beersheba, Biziothia, Bela, Elam, Ezim, Eltolad, Kesli, Hormah, Ziklag, Madmanah, Samsonah, Lebaoth, Shilhim, Ain, and Rimmon, a total of 29 towns and their villages. In the western foothills, Eshtaol, Zorah, Ashna, Zanoah, En-Ganim, Tappuah, Enam, Jarmuth, Adullam, Soka, Azekah, Sharaim, Adathaim, and Gedera, or Gedorathaim, 14 towns and their villages. Zinon, Hadashah, Migdal, Gad, Dilian, Mizpah, Joktheel, Lachish, Boxlah, Eglon, Kaban, Lamas, Kittish, Gederoth, Beth Dagon, Nama, and Makkedah, 16 towns and their villages. Limnah, Aster, Ashan, Ephthah, Ashna, Nezeb, Kila, Agzib, and Marshah, 9 towns and their villages. Ekron, with its surrounding settlements and villages. West of Ekron, all that were in the vicinity of Ashdod, together with their villages. Ashdod, its surrounding settlements and villages, and Gaza, its settlements and villages, as far as the Wadi of Egypt and the coastline of the Great Sea. They're not going to take those cities yet. Those are the Philistine cities. The Philistines are going to be there for centuries. So even though this area has been allotted to Judah, Judah isn't going to live in all this area, because they aren't able to drive out everybody living there. In the hill country, Shamir, Jeter, Soka, Dana, Kiriath, Sana, that is Deber, Anab, Eshtemoa, Anim, Goshen, Holon, and Gilo, 11 towns and their villages. Arab, Duma, Eshan, Janim, Beth, Tepuah, Athakah, Humtah, Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, and Zior, 9 towns and their villages. Maon, Carmel, Ziph, Judah, Jezreel, Jokdeam, Zanoah, Cain, Gibeah, and Timnah, 10 towns and their villages. Halahul, Beth-Zur, Gedor, Maarath, Beth and Aloth, and El-Tikon, 6 towns and their villages. Kiriath Baal, that is Kiriath Jearim, and Ramah, 2 towns and their villages. In the desert, Beth Arabah, Midim, Sekakah, Nibshah, the city of Salt, and En-Gedi, 6 towns and their villages. Judah could not dislodge the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. To this day, the Jebusites live there as the people of Judah. Well, we know then that this was written or finalized at a time before the Israelites took Jerusalem, because they did take Jerusalem eventually. David would make his capital there. The city, Judah's capital would be there. The temple would be there. So there does come a point in time when they do take Jerusalem, and the Jebusites are driven out. David does that. That's about 400 years from now. So at some point, so we know then that the text of Joshua was finished before then. At least that line was, because the Jebusites did not end up remaining in Jerusalem all throughout the time of the Old Testament. They are driven out eventually. But whoever ended up writing that, whether it's Joshua himself, or Phinehas, the priest of the generation after Joshua, or some priest later on in time after that, I don't know. No one knows. It's impossible to say. But whoever it was clearly finished that before the Jebusites were driven out from Jerusalem, which they do end up being driven out. David does take Jerusalem in the thousands or so BC, around 1000 BC. So about 400 years later-ish. So somewhere down the line, during that time, is when Joshua was finished. We got lots more to go. That's just Judah. We still got 8 more of these. Thankfully, Judah has the longest list. So the rest will be shorter in comparison to Judah, but there's still 8 more of these to go through. But we'll do that another day. Right now, I've spoken all I can speak for the day.